All right.
You waiting for me to speak?
We're
No.
letting we're letting everybody log in. We're watching the participants are just now logging in. We're going to give them just another minute. I can see all the different classes logging into the webinar. All right. Well, I'm going to give everybody just another minute to sort of file in and welcome everybody as they do so. My name's Allison Vick. I'm the historian for the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, and I'm joined today by a number of our schools across East Tennessee. I want to thank everybody for attending. I know we had a slight hiccup. I apologize for the technological delay, but we're here and settled now. And I want to extend my deepest and warmest appreciation to Miss Gail Lesser Gerber and Mr. Ben Lesser from Zachor Foundation, who have made this opportunity available to students and teachers across East Tennessee. We are very grateful that you're here to share your story with us today. And I also want to welcome especially our teacher fellow, Lori Wilhoit of Greenville City Schools and Greene County Schools, who really worked hard to make this available to us all. So thank you so much. And Mr. Lesser, you have an incredible story. So I don't want to detract from the time that you have to share that with our audiences. And so I want to warm you a very warm wishes from East Tennessee, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Miss Allison. Certainly. Yes, my friends, I come to you from an era in history where civilization lost its humanity, its heart, a time when there were only three kinds of people in the world. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. We now know that the whole world knew what was happening to the Jewish people, but they chose to be silent, giving Hitler carte blanche to do with them anything that he wished. And he did. 6 million of us, 1.5 million of whom were children. And the world was silent, not a peep. You want to know my story? I was born in Krakow, Poland, and I lived in a 3-story apartment house on a main street. Let me introduce this is the buildings that we lived in. And you have 3 windows here. The third window is my bedroom. That was on a major street. I want to introduce my parents. My father, Lazar, a mother, Shari, Moishi, Lola Lieber, Goldie, my older sister, and that's me in the center. And this is my little brother, Tuli. Out of the 7 of us, only 2 of us survived. Only my sister Lola and I. The rest of them were all slaughtered by the Nazis. Yes, the building that we lived in, one early in the morning started to shake and rattle. And when I ran to the window to see what's going on, I saw tanks were rolling down the street. Following the tanks, they were half-tracks. And everyone, so often a soldier would jump out of the half-track, get on the sidewalk, and this is how they occupied the city. Following them were the Wehrmacht, the foot soldier with their shiny black boots. It was quite impressionable for a 10-and-a-half-year-old at that time. As soon as they passed, my father called us into the dining room and sat us down in chairs and said, okay, from this moment on, there are no more kids. You are all adults. You will obey, you're going to listen, no back talk. And this is how it was. We grew out overnight. And the fifth day after occupation of Krakow, we found out what Nazi brutality was all about. A truck pulls up to the gate early in the morning and they started to bang on the gate. The super came running out. He says, "Whoa, what's going on?" And a truck full of soldiers. All they wanted to know is where the Jewish people live. And he was quick to oblige. The lessers, he showed our apartment, lived on one side. The other side of the building, there lived the other young couple who had two daughters, a little younger than I, and the mother gave birth to an infant little boy about 2 months earlier. They came breaking down the door, pistol whipping us. We were still in our beds. In their hands, they held open sacks, and they were yelling, "Throw in all your valuables, money, gold, silver, anything of value." They threw it in, and they were beating up my father to open the safe. While my father is trying to open the safe, we hear that terrible screaming from our neighbor's apartment. My sister Lola and I ran out through the kitchen door into their kitchen door, and this is what we saw. This monster was holding that infant little boy and swinging him and screaming to the parents, "Make him shut up." Of course, the parents and the daughters were yelling, our baby, don't hurt our baby." With a smirk on his face, he smashes the baby's head into the doorpost, killing it instantly. This is a sight that won't leave me. Day and night, I see it in front of me. That screaming baby and that sudden silence, what came out of his head. My God. But this was the beginning. From then on, there were new ordinances coming in every day for the Jewish people. You couldn't travel anymore. You couldn't go to certain theaters. You couldn't go to restaurants. Nothing but new ordinances. And one ordinance was that the Jewish people may no longer reside in Krakow, but they gave us a choice. If you wanted to live in Krakow, you had to go into the ghetto. They made the ghetto. If you don't know what a ghetto is, ask your teachers, they'll explain to you. It was a terrible place to live. And my father was preparing to go into the ghetto. My father's family, numbering over 200, all went into the ghetto. As my father is packing to go into the ghetto, a young man walks up by the name of Michael Lieber. He says, "Mr. Lesser, you know how I feel about your daughter Lola. I'm in love with her, and someday I'd love to marry her. But do me a favor, come to the same communities that my father and I are moving to." The name of the community is Nyepolomice. Nyepolomice. Well, my father gave him a choice to go into the ghetto in Nyepolomice. He chose to go to Nyepolomice. This was miracle number one, because all the people who went inside the ghetto were rounded up, put in cattle cars, taken to a extermination camp called Belzec, and everyone was exterminated. So my father came close to being exterminated with the whole family. But Michael Lieber's wish to have Lola go to the same community saved us. Saved us. I didn't tell you, my father's business was wine and syrup. He had the wine and syrup manufacturing, and he also had a chocolate factory. He was the first one to manufacture chocolate-covered wafers, something like Kit Kat. They were all, wrapped in tinfoil. Every time my father would come home from the business, us kids would search his pockets, and we would always find some goodies in there. Of course, everything was confiscated, taken away. A man works all his life, and just like that, everything is taken away. They wouldn't even let him go in to take his briefcase. We are now in Neapolomitsa. I'm sorry, we are on our way to Neapolomitsa, and we find out that my father had 1,000 American dollars that he saved up for a rainy day. He put the money into a religious book. Between the pages, he pasted them and closed it up and put it in a sack full of books, mostly religious books. And we left Krakow 2 hours out of the city. We're being stopped. Halt! Two husky Nazis jump on the wagon. The first thing they wanted to know, do we have any Jewish literature books? And they saw those 2 sacks full of books, so they picked them up and they heaved it on the side of the road. They had a mountain full of books. You see, everyone who didn't go into the ghetto had to cross this road to leave Krakow. So they were confiscating the book, and once everyone passed, they were going to have a bonfire burning all the books. My sister Lola spoke a beautiful German. So she walks up to him. She says, look, my father is a writer. He wrote his autobiography in a book. Let him keep this one book. Well, maybe he liked the way she spoke German. He says, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes. So the whole family started to climb on a mountain of books. They all looked the same. After 5 minutes, he was chasing us away without the book. And my father is going to a new community with a family of 6 without a penny to his name. We were a family of 7, but my oldest sister, Goldie, was in Munkacs. Munkacs was a city in Hungary where my grandparents lived from my mother's side of the family. My father's side lived in Krakow, my mother's side in Munkacs. So she was in Hungary, which was a free country. But here my father has 6 of us on a wagon without a penny to his name. He can't get a job. Jewish people are not allowed to be hired. So he came into the house that Michael rented for us. One side of the house lived the farmer. The other side was our side. And between the 2 apartments, there was a baking oven. people used to bake their own breads. When my brother-in-law heard what happened to my future brother-in-law, heard what happened to my father, he went out and he brought him a sack full of flour, 100 pounds of flour. When my father saw that, his face lit up. Instead of baking bread to feed the family, he started to bake pretzels. Why pretzels? All you need for pretzels is flour, water, and salt. And those ingredients he had. Then he took the pretzels to the neighboring bars and he offered it for sale. It was a novelty, so they started to buy the pretzels. Now my father became a little baker in that community. He baked all kind of cakes, cookies, mandelbread, all kind of goodies. I was 12 years old and I was baking with him. To this day, I still remember how to bake some things. And meanwhile, Lola and Michael got married. And this is the wedding guests that you see. And out of all these people, only 3 of us survived. Michael, Lola, and I. The rest of them were all slaughtered. That little boy with the white suit is my little brother, Tuli. He's leaning against my mother. No one survived, just the 3 of us. Michael and Lola moved into an apartment house. It was a duplex. One side lived the owner of the duplex, and the other side was their apartment. The owner of the duplex happened to be the mayor of that community. And one night he comes home, he says, Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard the rumor there is going to be a raid against the Jewish people tonight or tomorrow night. Save yourselves. When Michael heard that, he went out and he hired a wagon with a driver, a horse and buggy with a driver, and we loaded it up and we snuck out in the middle of the night. The only place we can go to was a city called Bochnia. Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. Bochnia ghetto had a very bad reputation. Every so often, 2 or 3 dump trucks would come in, and the Nazis would go from house to house and pull out the children from their beds and throw them into these dump trucks. Well, you can imagine the parents were screaming for the children are screaming for the parents. And as they filled up these trucks, they started to move out of the ghetto. And the parents were running behind these trucks, screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck. And as the parents were running behind, they were mowing down the parents. That resonated throughout Europe. Stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of these atrocities. But we had no choice. We had to go to Bochnia Ghetto. And a good thing we did, because that night the Nepalomid said there was a raid. And they rounded up thousands of Jewish people, put them into trucks, and took them to the neighboring forest. The men were given shovels, dig a ditch, and everyone was shot. Everyone was shot and thrown into that ditch. How do we know this? We found out after the war, Lola and I were the only survivors. So we went there to Nyepalamice to find out what happened to all the people. And the farmers were telling us as they went in the morning to the forest to pick mushrooms and berries to sell in the market, they saw those trucks pull in. So they were hiding behind trees and they saw everything that happened. They said the ground was moving 3 days afterwards. They didn't care, dead or alive, they buried you. In Bochnia Ghetto, where the driver unloads us in the middle of the street and we're sitting there, when Michael sees his friends that he used to go to school with, he's wearing a uniform like a soldier, like a policeman. His name was Farber. Farber had no weapons. All he had is a baton. And their job was to keep order inside the ghetto. When Farber sees Michael, he says, "What are you doing here?" Michael tells him the story. He had to move out from Nyepalamice. He says, "Don't worry, Michael, I'll find you a place to live." And he took Michael and Lola and his parents and sisters to a place. And then he comes to us and he took my father, my mother, myself, my little brother to another apartment. All of us, just one big room. Inside the room, there were 8 other people. Now we were 12. There was no beds, no, all was straw on the ground, blankets on top of the straw. Everyone inside the ghetto had to work. If you didn't work, you didn't receive any rations. My job was working in a uniform factory. I sewed down buttons on uniforms. It was easy work, but it was 13 hours a day. Very little sleep and very little food. This lasted about a year and a half, and then Farber, that friendly policeman, goes over to Michael's and he tells him, "Save yourselves. I heard the rumor there is going to be a raid inside the ghetto tonight or tomorrow." Ever since those trucks would pull in and pull out the children from their beds, every apartment and every house had a hiding place. They called it a bunker. That's when we found out our bunker was this ornate piece of furniture where you hang your coats and jackets. Can I have a picture of it, please? Yes, that's where we had to hide. You open the door, you move the clothing apart, the back panel would slide apart. There was a hole in the wall, and the 12 of us could crawl through that hole. The last one would close the door behind them, put the closing back in place, close the back panel, and we stood there all night long, freezing cold, because the roof was open, and it was snowing, and lucky for us, the side of the street side building was connected, so they couldn't see us from outside. All night long, we heard shootings, dogs barking, screaming, yelling. We heard our neighbors are being torn apart by these dogs. They're screaming. Towards morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, we dared to come out. When we came out, we couldn't believe what our eyes are seeing. People were laying in the snow, dead, some of them dying, torn apart by dogs. I saw a mother and a little infant torn apart by a dog laying in the snow, dead. There were push carts going around and picking up these bodies and pieces of bodies and placing them in the push carts. And then they were taking him to the ghetto square, and they were piling them up like logs of wood. And these cultured people would come with gasoline cans and pour gasoline over the bodies, and they started the Bochnia ghetto square bonfire, of human bonfire. Imagine that. Imagine how it smelled. Imagine that the ashes flying all over, the screams, the yelling. You can't believe what was going on. They were throwing in people alive into the flames. I knew that my sister Lola was hiding in a doghouse. You heard it right, a doghouse. You picked up the floor, there was a step ladder, and there was room for 7 people to hide in that doghouse. I find Michael, and he tells me the story. As they were about to go into the doghouse, another Jewish policeman by the name of Morris Schiller, walks up, and he says to Michael, I know your hiding place in this doghouse. Unless you take my mother and my 2 sisters along, I'm going to call the authorities. Well, there was only room for 7, and now there were 9. So Michael and Lola walked away, letting the others go into the doghouse. The mother was running after him. You were youngsters, you just have a new life. You just got married. We lived our lives. Let us stay out. But of course, Michael and Lola wouldn't hear of it. They just walked away. As they were walking, they found Morris Schiller. I mean, no, they found Farber, that friendly policeman. He says, Michael, Lola, why aren't you hiding someplace? So Michael told him the story about Morris Schiller. He says, don't worry, where my sister and her 2 children are hiding, there is room for you. Follow me. So they followed them to a ladder tannery. Above the tannery, there was a water tank. He said, inside that water tank, there is my sister and her 2 children. You walk up on a step ladder, there's a rope inside, you lower yourself. When you come down, lower yourself, and the last person should push the ladder away from it, and wait there all night. In the morning, if you hear a knock on the tank, which is a signal that the coast is clear, you can come out. Well, Michael and Lola are telling the story now. They walked up to the ladder. They walked up on the ladder and they lowered themselves with a rope inside the tank. And they saw his sister is standing knee deep in water. Little girl, waist high in water. And the mother is holding, the sister is holding a little baby, infant boy, who was sound asleep. And they're shaking and shivering, and their little rats running, swimming in the water and nibbling in their feet. And then Lola picked up the, the, the little infant child while Michael picked up the little girl from the floor, and they stood there holding them. They stood there all night long, and all they heard were screams and shooting and dogs barking. The same thing we heard all night long. They are heard too also. Towards morning, there was a knock on the tank. Harbor giving him the signal that you can come out. They pulled themselves up on the road and then down the ladder, and that Harbor put the ladder back to the tank, and they went down the ladder, and after they got some circulation back into their leg, the first thing they wanted to know is go to the doghouse to see what happened to Michael's parents and his family. When they came to the doghouse, this is what they saw. Everybody was laying dead in the snow with a bullet hole in their head. Everybody laying in the snow, the bullet hole. Little Marika, the 7-year-old sister, holding on to a doll that Lola made her. Lola saw that and she started to scream. Michael stopped her. They're still burning bodies. They may hear you. So with a quelched cry, they knew what they had to do. They had to see, according to the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 12 hours. If you can, 24 hours the latest. So Michael went out, found the rickety wheelbarrow, put the family in the wheelbarrow. Marika still holding on to her doll, and pushed them to the cemetery. At the cemetery, Michael found a shovel, and Lola, with her bare hands, made a grave. They put the family in the grave. They put the family in the grave. All of a sudden,
Excuse me, Ben.
yes.
You get the picture of the doghouse? Was the
What?
picture was the picture of the doghouse up?
Yes. It was up later, but it was up eventually. Okay. So where was I? We got
Since we're a little short on time, why don't you they buried him and just talk about the shooting of what he might have seen after the burial, because he would
yeah.
the capo that wanted his family buried in the same area.
All right. Morris Schiller walks up to them. He says, it wasn't my fault, and it wasn't his fault because his own mother and his own sister were also killed. However, he says that graves that you put your family in, I won it from my mother and my sister. Lola started to cry, and he says, Michael says, Lola, he's got the power over us. So they pulled everybody out. They put him back on the wheelbarrow and took him to another spot and started all over again. While this is going on, they heard a Jeep coming up the hill, and it stopped at the cemetery, and two husky Nazis jump out and they yell, Morris Schiller, Morris Schiller. And he says, yeah, well, here I am. He walks up to them. They pull out the revolver and they shot him. This is what they did to people who have seen too much. They didn't want to leave any witnesses. So afterwards, the truck went back down at the hill, and Michael and Lola walked down holding each other, crying. And there were people going around in push carts and saying, anybody left in the ghetto has to go register in the Judenrat. If you didn't register, you wouldn't receive any rations. Well, to tell you the rest of the story, how we were able to get out of the ghetto with 55 other people, our family plus 55. It's a long story. Please read my book because you should know about it. It's very, very important. But we are now outside the ghetto. And outside the ghetto, Michael befriends a truck driver who was hauling coal. And he asked him if he would convert his truck into a double-decker where there'll be Jewish people hiding between the coal and the chassis. And he listened to Michael. He converted his truck into a double-decker, and there was coal on top, and between the coal and the chassis, 10 of us could hide, 5 and 5. It was really hard to imagine 10 people there, but we were able to squeeze them in. The first group of people that went in was 8 from a family, plus 2 from our family. There was one very wealthy man, and he paid for us because we took him out of the ghetto. So the first one going was Lola and Michael. Why did they go first? Because you couldn't always trust these drivers. They would take your money, then that they would turn you into the SS, and they would get paid ransom money from Jewish people trying to escape. They would pay them if they turned them in. So we couldn't trust them, but we had a password made up between us. If the driver comes back with the right password, then you can trust them. Sure enough, 2 days later, the driver came back with the right passport. There was time for another 10 people to go in. 2 from our family. My father insisted that I and my little brother go next. So this is what we did. We got into the truck like sardines. I was facing my little brother, and the truck pulls out. About an hour outside of the city, we were being stopped, halt, and there are a bunch of soldiers with rifles and they're talking to the driver. We didn't hear what he was saying. They were saying, and then the truck started to move again. We thought, well, maybe they're letting us go. But all of a sudden, we see a soldier standing on the step near the driver with a rifle. And now we hear soldiers are walking on top of the coal, and the coal dust was filtering through. My little brother is about to sneeze, and I'm holding his nose. 2 hours they were with us, then the truck stopped, and they left. We thought for sure they're taking us to be killed. When we hear Dankeschön, Dankeschön, they were just hitchhiking. Imagine talking about miracles. There were soldiers on 10 of us walking on top of us and not knowing there are Jewish people hiding under them. An hour later, we came to the forest, and at the forest, he let us out of the truck, and he told us to go into the forest about 300 yards. There is a tool shed. Inside the tool shed, there is a smuggler. He's waiting for you. And sure enough, we went up into the tool shed, and inside there was a smuggler. He was the forest ranger who was a smuggler. He took us to the middle of the forest, laid us down on our stomach, and told us to look up. We look up and we see soldiers are walking with their dogs back and forth with their rifles. We can see them, and barbed wires. So we just laid there until 3 a.m. 3 a.m., the soldiers came down the hill. They met new soldiers, and they had a little ceremony. And then the new soldiers, the fresh soldiers with the dogs would go up. During those 5 or 10 minutes, we had the chance to cross the border. And 3 o'clock, we saw them come down. And once they were out of our way, we shimmied our way up to the border, and he picked up the barbed wire. He told us to go across. However, he says, be careful because there is a big ravine, and if you tumble, it's all over. They're gonna hear you. So he told us to sit down at the edge of the mountain, hold hands, slide down quietly, and down on the bottom there is a plateau. You'll be all right, just be quiet, which is what we did. We sat down holding hands, and we slid down a deep mountain, and then we stopped on a plateau. I asked my little brother, are you okay? He says, yes. When somebody slaps me by my shoulder, I jump out of my skin. He says, Binish, I'm your Uncle Bela. No one called me Binish except immediate family. He says, I says, how did you come here in the middle of nowhere? How did you find us? He says, Lola and Michael went through 2 days earlier, and they told us exactly where you come down. So I waited for you. Well, from this point, we had to cross another border from Czechoslovakia to Hungary.
Excuse me, Ben.
Yes.
Hi, I'm going to just interrupt you right here because we are running out of short on time for the students. But I want them all to realize that actually this has happened before Ben went into the concentration camps, before he was in Auschwitz and transferred to Dernhow and in a hard labor camp. So I'm going to have I'm just going to show you a couple pictures here real quick. And so we could show you what the how they put people into the cars. This is when the Nazis came into Hungary. They had everybody that they were going to transport them to a place where they could live. The older people will be taken care of. The children will have schooling. There will be work there, and so this is how they transported people, and they were actually taking them to Auschwitz, the concentration camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau. 80 people to a car, and everybody had all their belongings. So if you could imagine 80 people in a car with all their belongings, everybody had to stand. There was no time, there was no place for anybody to sit down. There was no sanitary facilities. There was no bathroom. They had 2 buckets of water in the in each train car. And once the water was gone and there was no place for people to go, they were going to the bathroom into these buckets. And as the buckets started to fill up and the debris went over to the ground, they were actually happy that they had all that, the suitcases and the bags and everything to sit on top of. But 3 days, the train went without stopping, without food or anything. This is one of the death trains that Ben was on. We won't have time today, but he was also on a death train that was 3 weeks long. And this is how he made his way to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they had the selection. And Ben, if you want to mention about the selection real quick, and then we could go into the death march, okay?
Okay. Students, all I can tell you, it's very important that you know what happened, because we had to skip about an hour of my story. Read it in the book. It's very important that you do that. And this is my book, if you can see it, Living a Life That Matters from Nazi Nightmare to American Dream.
And all the teachers have the information on the book. So,
okay.
So we're okay in there.
I want you to know, do they know the book has to come directly from us?
Yes, don't worry. Yes, they have all the information. So you want to talk about the selection?
All right, when I came down to Auschwitz, they opened the gate. It was nighttime, and they were screaming, leave all your belongings on the floor. Don't pick anything up. Women and children to the right, men to the left. I was holding on to my sister, Goldie, and my little brother, Tully, and they were just pulled away from me, and never to see them again. They went directly to the gas chambers. Imagine. But I went with my uncle, my cousin, because I figured, well, if this is a labor camp, they want you to labor. And if you labor, they might feed you better. That's why I went with my uncle, my cousin. But I was 15 and a half years old. I wasn't a man and I wasn't a child either. I could have gone with either one. But my sister and my little brother were sent directly to the gas chambers. So it was a miracle that I decided to go with my uncle. And it was a very strange place, the ashes flying. It was nighttime, ashes just like snow. Every time you make a footstep, you leave a footprint in the ashes. And it smelled funny. We see flames shooting out from chimneys, and we're moving forward. And there was a doctor standing there, Dr. Mengele. He was the angel of death. He decided who should live, who should die. That's Dr. Mengele. He had a white glove and he's going right, left, right, left, right, left. Every so often he would ask somebody a question. And when I came close to him, he asked the young man, "Kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers?" And he said he had a bad knee. He would rather go by truck. That poor soul was sent to the right, which meant to death. But who knew? But when I heard that, it didn't make any sense. Why would he ask, "Can you run 5 kilometers? I can see the barracks are right here." I figured he's testing us to see if we're strong enough to work. So I tell my uncle, my cousin, whatever he asks you, tell him you're healthy, you can work, you can run, okay? But let me go first. So I went first. Remember, I'm 15 and a half, and I go in front of him, tiptoe. I tiptoe to stretch myself out, saluted him, and I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. I'm 18 years old, I'm healthy, and I can work. So he asked me, "Kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers?" I said, "Jawohl, yes." And he sent me to the left. And both my uncle and my cousin were sent to the left. How much time do I have?
Much time does he have? 10 minutes. We want questions from the kids also. 5 minutes? I think you should sum it up so we could have questions from the kids. 5 minutes to sum it
I
up.
sum it up, but it was impossible what I saw in Auschwitz. They had fiery pits. They were throwing in children and have that people in these fiery pits day and night, day and night. We were there for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they sent us to labor camp, and the labor camp is a whole new story, which I don't have time to tell you because it was very interesting, very interesting. But we started to march, and they marched us on a death march for 7 weeks. In my book, I said 3 or 4 weeks, but we were corrected lately by a professor of Germany. He says, "Mr. Lesser marched 7 weeks. There's 460 kilometers from Durnau to Buchenwald. If you didn't stay in, if you couldn't march fast enough, they shot you, simply shot you." This picture is in Buchenwald when I was in a bathhouse there, showered, and from there they fed us. They gave us a night's sleep, and the next morning with fresh clothes, they put us back in cattle cars for 3 weeks with one bread between my cousin and I. We shared the bed, the bread. Miracles of miracles. Finally, we arrived at Dachau. When we arrived at Dachau, out of the 80 people in the cattle car, only 4 of us survived. My cousin and I, the rest of them were all dead. Everybody was dead in the train. In a train out of 7,000 people, only 18 of us walked out alive. And today I'm the only survivor. Any questions? I skipped a lot, but I had no choice.
All right, I think we want to open it up to questions now. So if anybody has a question, if you could put it in the Q&A, that would be fantastic, or in chat. And Mr. Lester, we have one question coming in that is asking about the pictures, and a teacher is asking who painted the pictures that you've shared in the webinar.
Yes, my sister Lola, my surviving sister, was an artist, and she painted all these pictures from memory. These are photographs. This is my wife and I after 72 years of beautiful marriage. This is my sister Lola and I. Yes, she was an artist. Any other questions?
We have a teacher asking, it says, you are from Krakow. Do you know any of the Schindler survivors?
No, I don't know any. I don't know.
And then we have also a question that says, why do you think it is important, particularly in 2024, for students to hear your testimony, and what would you like them to take from it?
It's very important, especially now that there is so much anti-Semitism in the world. Just remember this: Hitler and the Nazis did not start with killing. It all started with hate. The hatred has to stop. Why hate? Love and hate are both contagious, so choose love. That's all I can tell you. It's important to stop the hatred, because hatred will ultimately consume the hater.
And then I have a question coming in that says, how you seem to know that you be familiar with a lot of different languages. How many languages did you grow up speaking?
I grew up speaking 4 languages real good, and 2 additional partially, 6 languages.
This question is asking, do you think it is possible for another Holocaust to occur?
Well, maybe not in the United States, because we have our Constitution and certain laws, but it's alarming to see that so many people are anti-Semites. Right here in the United States, they hate the Jews, they hate the blacks, they don't know where to stop hating. These people, in my opinion, are sick. Why hate? Why can't we live side by side and appreciate our differences rather than hate them? Maybe you learn something from each other. So the hatred has to stop. Will another Holocaust happen in the United States? I don't think so. But killing is killing, whether you call it a Holocaust or something else.
I want to just say something here. I'm Gail Ben's daughter, second generation, and it's your generation right now that needs to move forward and stop the hate and learn to respect other religions, other races, learn to respect other people for their differences. And as Ben said, maybe learn from them. But it's your generation that's going to make the difference. If there's hatred in your home, you know, talk to your parents. See, you know, it's time to start coming together. Over the last so many years, we've seen the hatred grow, and it's been multiplying throughout the world, and it just has to stop somewhere. So whether it's a smile, a nice greeting to somebody, the kindness makes a difference. And if we live with feeling that we want to live a life and be kind to other people and respectful to other people the way we want people to be to us, that's where it starts. It starts with you. It starts at home. I also want to mention to our teachers, and I know we could take a couple more questions, that we do have the ZachorLearn.org, and I hope you will go visit it. We have a full curriculum in there, much more of Ben's story also, and it's free to students, to teachers, to parents, to anybody, and it's called ZachorLearn.org. Just visit our website, Zachor Holocaust, Remembrance Foundation, and everything's there that you need. So please come and visit us. And students, especially, we have a program that's called I Shout Out. And we're trying to get 6 million shout outs, starting there, then to 11 million for the voices that were silenced. And it's up to you and your generation to shout out for things that you believe in, against bigotry, against anti-Semitism, against bullying, against intolerance. You want to shout out for freedom, to love thy neighbor. This is up to you to be able to do this. So please, on our website, we have the I Shout Out part of our foundation also. Help us get to that 6 million. And your picture will be able to be on there. Your grandchildren one day will be able to see your picture and what you shouted out for and believed in. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Gail. I think we have time for maybe one last question. I'm seeing a lot come back into the Q&A. Thank you for all those. I know that we are running low on time, so I'll try to combine some of these. And this is for you, Mr. Lesser. Just asking about life after the Holocaust. If you could tell us when you came to the United States, and how difficult was it for you to begin your journey of sharing your story openly with different audiences?
Yes, in 1947, I came to the United States. And I remember when the ship came into the harbor, New York City skyline, it made such an impression on me, seeing these skyscrapers. And I said to myself, Ben, this is day one of your life. Don't ever forget the past, but from this day on, you're going to make a success. And a success, you're going to succeed in this beautiful country, America. And thanks God, I did, but it wasn't so easy. But in my book, I show what I had to do. You know, we slept on Skid Row for several weeks. I say we, a friend of mine and I, we were out of work, we were out of money. We had no money to buy food. We had to hawk all our clothing into pawn shops, everything. So we were in bad shape when things started to turn around, and we made it. We made a beautiful life for ourselves.
I'm going to mention something real quick. Okay, so I'm Ben's daughter. I'm now in my late 60s. When I was growing up, I knew that my dad was a Holocaust survivor. That's all I really knew. He never shared his story with us. My grandparents on my mother's side lived across the street, and they came over years earlier. They fled Russia during the pogrom. We heard their stories. My father did not share his story with us. It really wasn't until I had children and the Show Off Foundation was doing a video on Ben. And I remember laying there on the floor in his hallway, listening to him give testimony to the Show Off Foundation. That is the first time that I learned his whole story. And from that time forward, he started speaking at my son's school, and it just went on from there. After he retired, he really started being very open and telling his story.
And I want to thank you, Mr. Lesser, especially for coming on and sharing your testimony with us today. I know that our students are getting ready to go home and that our teachers are getting ready to close out the school day. And we're having sort of torrential rain in East Tennessee right now. But thank you so much. And I also have the book. So teachers, you can certainly reach out to Gail. We also can connect you to getting the book and the resources. It's an excellent, excellent read. So make sure that you have access to the book, or if you don't, reach out to us. But Gail and Ben, thank you both so much for joining us today. And I apologize again for the technological delay, but it has worked out beautifully. And I think I speak for all of us, Mr. Lester, when I think every one of us took away something from your talk today that we will never forget. So thank you so much to both of you. And I wish you just the best afternoon. And thank you again. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
thank you, teachers, to joining us, and students as well. We really appreciate you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.